Hey, welcome to Illume Bible Studies. So you've just bought a Bible for the first time, for the upteenth time, you've grown up with them your whole life. But you've never actually asked the question, what is the Bible? Or you've seen one on a shelf and you've wondered what it is. What is it? Why does it exist? Who uses it and why? Well, then this video is for you. The Bible is actually not one book, but a collection of 66 books spanning almost 8,000 years of written history. And although they're not ordered chronologically from the oldest to the newest, they are ordered in such a way that they make sense. So that the first book in the Bible, although not the oldest one in terms of when it was written, is the one that speaks about the creation of the world. When you open the Bible, the very first thing that you will read in 1 Genesis verse 1 is, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So it starts at the very beginning and it ends at the point where the church is just beginning to emerge, and the first of the church leaders are giving their final parting advice to the church itself and to the believers of the church to guide them in the path forward. So you may have picked up the Bible in English, or if English is not your first language, you might have one in your language that you usually speak. The Bible's been translated into most languages, and here the key word is translate. No matter the language, you will have usually more than one option of translation. In English, there are quite a few. The reason for this is because the Bible wasn't originally written in English or any of the currently spoken languages. It was written in an ancient form of Hebrew and a common form of ancient Greek called Koine Greek. So when you read it in its original languages, the whole of the Old Testament will be in Hebrew and the whole of the New Testament in Greek. These were the vernaculars of the people that believed in God at the time. And that's why they were written in those languages. This leads to some confusion because some of the translations may say things differently to others, and some might be interpreted differently from others. And that is why preachers and pastors generally at some point in time make contact with the original languages and learn how to read and interpret them from there. Because the best thing to do when you get confused about what your specific translation is saying is to go and look at the old languages, the original languages, and try and figure out what they were trying to say and what they meant to the people that read them back then. This is why you'll often hear sermons where the pastor will refer to the original word for this is whatever. And that is just because they need you to understand that the words in that language might mean something quite differently. You'll often have the fact in especially Hebrew where one word in Hebrew will be a whole sentence in English. And that sentence might be 3 or 4 or 5 sentences to try and capture the full encompassment of the word in Hebrew. This makes it very difficult to just write a translation. And that is why preachers will often go off about the words themselves, trying to get you to understand them. The good news is that you don't actually have to understand one of the ancient languages. You can pick up a translation in the language that you are most comfortable with. And if you do have any issues or any questions as to what something means, just go to a pastor and ask him or her to help you with understanding that specific part of the Bible. So the 66 books of the Bible are divided into 2 sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. They're called testaments because the words therein testify about the actions and history that God has with his people, about the ways in which he has guided believers throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, and in the way in which the faith as we know today has grown. The Old Testament begins with Genesis, which tells of the creation of the world, and it ends with the prophets. The prophets were those that understood the will of God, that heard his voice, and they would come to kings and people with instructions and warnings and things that God wanted to say to them. The New Testament starts with the Gospels, with the birth of Jesus Christ, and they end with the letters that the founders of the church wrote to their communities to guide them in the way forward. Together, these 66 books tell us the tale of a God who created the world and then got involved with the people therein. They tell us the tale of a God that loved the world so much that he came to the world himself so that he might save everyone, that they may be with him forever. And it tells us the tale of the founding of a religion that has stood for millennia and still stands today. The Bible consists of 66 books, and therefore it also has a lot of writers. More than 66, in fact, as a lot of the books were collaborations such as the Psalms that were written by more than one writer. These people that wrote the Bible might have just been human beings that wrote words onto paper, but they were inspired by God, they were led by the Holy Spirit, and oftentimes the things that they wrote included words from God Himself. Things like the Ten Commandments and the teachings of Jesus are the words of God Himself, dealing with His people and teaching them and guiding them in how to live according to His will, how to live in the way that He created them to live. And that very briefly sums up what the Bible is. Why we have it is that it is a book that guides believers, that tells them the stories about how this faith got here, and that contains the writings of the earliest founders of the faith on how to live the life of a Christ follower. So whether you've just bought your first Bible, whether you're wondering about what it is because you want to buy one or you're interested, or whether you've had Bibles your whole life, now you know a bit more about what it is. Next time we're going to be looking at the Old Testament specifically in more detail, how it's ordered, where it happened, when it happened, who the key players are, and how to interpret some of the cultural things that might sound a little weird to us today. And I hope to see you then. Until then, God bless.